This truck is going to one of you guys. If you want to win it, you already know what to do. Hit the link down below. Every $3 you spend on the website equals 1 entry to win the Duramax. You only have 2 days left. You guys missed this car yet? Because I definitely do. Today is the day we are getting this thing back on the road. You might be wondering, what happened to it? Let's take a little drive. Well, boys, this is my OG Evo 10. First Evo I ever bought in my life. Before I bought this car, I was the biggest diehard Subaru fanboy in the world, which I still am. I still like Subarus, but I would say I'm much more of an Evo guy now than a Subaru guy. At least I think I am. So this is an 08 Evo 10. Quick little build breakdown. I know this car hasn't been on the channel for months. Completely stock motor from the oil pan all the way to the valve cover. Stock cams, stock springs and retainers, stock rods, stock pistons, stock motor. When I say stock motor, I mean stock motor. Unopened, never been messed with, and that goes for the transmission as well. 100% factory transmission in the car, 100% factory transfer case in the car, and I have currently an ETS turbo kit with a 6870 precision turbo, 68 millimeter precision, and the car made, what was it, 830 or 840 wheel horsepower on the dyno, and it lasted that way for quite a while. And then it decided to break the transmission. What I mean by that is there's pins in the diff, and when you're making a lot of power on these Evos, the pins start backing out and they'll start rubbing on the transmission case and rub a hole in the transmission case. So that's what happened on this car. Now currently I did decide to just patch that, so I put on some JB weld onto the transmission case and it's been holding. Obviously I don't care to put a bunch of miles on it like that, but for this drive I'm willing to, drive up and down the road. So currently driving this thing with, it's probably a little bit low in gear oil and JB weld on the case of the trans with pins backing out of the diff. So it's probably not the best thing in the world to drive. So that's what happened to this car. Motor still runs fine, still the stock motor, still making, 800 plus wheel on, I think it's like close to 40 pounds of boost if I remember correctly. And I would do a pull, but I would probably completely grenade the trans, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, that's the quick synopsis of the current state of the Evo 10. Today I do want to pull the transmission out of the car and get to work on it, fixing it. I guess we could do a little pull. Keep in mind this car's been sitting for months, but I'll do a little pull. Yeah, let's go fix it before I grenade the trans all the way. Now, no joke, I've probably done 40 pulls. I brought this thing to the track one time, did maybe 5 passes that night, and that was turned down that night because I was trying to learn how to drive this thing on the track. So I think my fastest was like a low 11, and then when we turned it up, I ended up getting kicked off the track. So that was that scenario. But this motor is a freaking trooper, man. Stock, it's actually a Rally Art motor. Not that it really makes a difference because I believe they are identical to Evo 10 motors. But it's a stock Rally Art motor, and she's living. Of course, it does have everything else. Radium double pumper with dual 450s, Radium dash 8 lines, tuned by Josh Bader from BBR. And this thing just will not give up the ghost. Let's head back to the shop, get this car on the lift. Goal for the day is to pull the trans, see exactly what's wrong with it. I hope it's just those pins backing out. It still shifts fine, goes through all the gears. I think everything else inside the transmission should be fine, the gear sets and whatnot. But we are gonna have to weld up that case, we're gonna have to fix our diff or replace it, and I might do a little bit of upgrading while we're in there. Man, oh man, it's been forever since we had an Evo 10 on the lift. Especially this Evo 10 here. I think I've probably had this car for 6 years, and in those years I want to say 6 years. This car's had, I think, 4 different motors in it. First motor, stock turbo, tuned, I forget what it made, maybe 350 wheel. Ended up bending a rod on the stock motor. Second motor was a built motor, pretty decently built motor. And then detonation took out, I think it was cylinder 2. Third motor, that only lasted a little bit in the thrust bearings. I think I installed them backwards, if I'm not mistaken. And that motor only lasted a couple hundred miles. And then the fourth motor lasted forever and ended up just only burning an exhaust valve. That actually happened on the dyno. So I take it back. This is our 5th motor. This, of course, being the 100% unopened, extremely leaky, missing apparently a rib off of our belt, stock motor. And where is our JB weld? Aha, there it is. I'm gonna grab a flashlight for that one. So if we look right up in there, right behind the cross member, you'll see that big old glob of JB weld. And if I'm remembering correctly, that is exactly what happens when those diff pins back out. And I don't know what power level that happens at, or if it's just a mileage thing. This car doesn't have, honestly, that many miles. So I do think it is just a power level thing. But keep in mind, this thing has been at 500 plus wheel for 3 years, 4 years maybe. A couple thousand miles. It's been at a lot of power. All right, we need to pull the trans. Mission, this guy here. Motor's gonna stay in the car. The T-case, of course, has to come out before I get the transmission out. And being that we have the lift, it's so much easier to just pretty much drop the entire subframe, and it gives us so much access to get the transmission out. I actually had this transmission out pretty recently to put a new clutch in it, and it was fine then. So I wish it would have showed signs then of internally imploding, but it was not. Now, if you guys remember back, I did go with the Evo 8, Evo 9 front brake setup, and that is so we can run the slicks on the car. Now for my daily wheel and tire setup, they're a set of R888s on 17-inch rays, but I do have the 16-inch slicks for it for when I do go to the track, which, if we can get this thing fixed in time, I do want to bring her back to the track here in a few days. There's one more track event in Spokane, and it'd be fun to get this thing out. Turn it all the way up actually this time, not leave it at no baby 5 or 550 wheel. We had it turned way down, and see if I can actually row some gears and make a good pass. Because this thing turned all the way up, it should easily be a low 10-second pass on a stock motor. At least I would think. I think right off the bat this time around, I'm just gonna completely remove the subframe. A lot of times I'll finagle around and try to like only drop it down a few inches. But if it's all the way out of the car, it is way easier to pull the transmission. Now, if you're wondering about a built motor situation, we're doing a completely built, it's not going in right now, but fully built, sleeved, like top of the line motor for this car. I don't have I don't have any of the parts here for it, to be honest. Otherwise, I might consider putting that in now. This thing might just become a full-on drag car because I don't really need a daily Evo 10 anymore. I have the Evo 8 as a daily. We have Bobby's Evo 10 that'll be back on the road soon. And yeah, I don't have any dedicated drag cars. So this thing, it's not for sure yet, but it would be cool to have a full-on drag car. I do want to keep interior and whatnot. Just have a fast car in general, you know? A 9-second Evo 10, that'd be plenty. As long as it's a low 9-second Evo 10. So there's 2 different things we can do right now. Either disconnect the lower ball joint, subframe comes out with the lower control arm comes out with the subframe, or we can disconnect it from the strut, pull off the caliper, so on and so forth. Of course, the easier and quicker way is the lower ball joint. It is easier if you disconnect the sway bar as well. Bam, and bam. Man, oh man, this car's filthy. Now this lower cross member right here, this guy's got to come off all the way. Now, one important thing that we need to do before we get too far and too carried away is go in the interior and disconnect the steering column, the shaft. A 12 mil bolt, you don't have to disconnect it. It can just pull out of the column itself, but it's easier if you just take that bolt out, mark it, take the bolt out, and then line up the marks when it's going back together, and you're done. You don't have to worry about messing around with the alignment forever. All right, it's really hard to see down here. I'll try to show you guys as best I can. But first, we need to pull off this cover right here. That covers the shebang. As soon as that cover's off, we have access to our joint right there. You can see mine's actually already marked because I have this car apart every week. Not really, but there is the 12 mil bolt I'm talking about. All right, with the bolt out, you take column, slide it up. Now with that disconnected, if there's a chance someone's gonna come in and turn your steering wheel, just somehow ratchet strap it like that or do something, because that's a good way, an easy way, a fast way of destroying the clock spring. Now we're gonna have 4 bolts for the subframe, 1 rear motor mount bolt, the power steering lines, and the subframe's out. Wrong bolt. Always, always, always the last bolt to come out, first bolt to go back in is that bolt right up there. That is for the rear of the motor. I guess it'd be considered a rear trans mount, but you guys get the point. With the subframe loose, it's so much easier to disconnect that, especially going back in. When you have the freedom and movement of the subframe, you can really get that lined up and then get everything else situated. I got that rear mount bolt removed. Now we're gonna drop it down a little bit. We don't gotta go crazy with it. Sometimes those control arms get caught up on the dust shields. There we go. Pull it down enough to disconnect the power steering lines from the rack. That's the method I do. You can disconnect the power steering lines from the pump and pull them through, but I find this way a little bit easier. It doesn't make a mess, so have a drain pan ready. All right, our first major part is coming out. Both power steering lines, feed and return, are disconnected. Subframe is coming out. This motor has some serious leakage, which is tempting to fix while it's out, but it's like, I could put this car back together. It could last 5 more pulls or 500 more pulls, we don't know. And then you eat a rod. So it's a little bit pointless to fix the oil leaks. So with that subframe out of the way, you can see how much space there is to work down here. Next thing that we need to remove is this. This is the transfer case. Before that, we're gonna drain the transfer case gear oil, the transmission gear oil. We gotta pull the axles and stub, pull off driveline, remove bolts, and T-case comes out. Wrong size. So the drain plug is a 24 mil for both trans and transfer. Not a 22 like I thought. Yeah, that's a fair amount of metal on this guy here. We may have more problems than I thought. Hey, at least the T-case oil looks good. Next up, both axles. You don't have to pull both. You can pull just the driver's side, but it's not that hard to pull both, so I pull both. And same concept with the T-case. You don't have to pull all the way out of the car, but it's like, why wouldn't you? Just to get it out of the way. Unless you're in a massive hurry, then it makes sense, but I'm not in a massive hurry. Make sure you pull the stub. The stub goes all the way through the transmission into the T-case, the transfer case. So if you don't pull this stub out, you'll never be able to separate the trans from the transfer. I'm actually gonna do something real quick. I don't think, being that we have everything else torn apart so much, I don't think we even need to pull the drive line. If I just unbolt the T-case, pull it off the transmission, and then slide that drive line out, we should be fine. It's 4 bolts, but it might save me a minute. Anyways, we have 3 bolts underneath, holding trans to transmission, holding transfer to transmission, and then 3 up top as well. Evo 10 and 9. You also have this line right here. This is for the AYC system. 14 mil and then 12 mil bolt holding that bracket on. This guy comes off with the T-case. Transfer case is ready to come out. If you have a stock location turbo and manifold and all that, I feel bad for you. But if you run a ETS kit, I don't feel bad for you because it's super easy to do. Transfer case is out and on the ground. Alrighty, time to pull the trans. Hardest part, disengaging the clutch throwout bearing. Sometimes it goes good, sometimes it's hard. Let's see how this one is. Recently, I've been having really good luck with these things. So I'm predicting this one I'll get in about 2 seconds. Oh yeah, maybe 5 seconds. It's done. It is done. So up top we have the shifter cables, 2 wiring connectors, and then there's this driver side mount. Now on the driver side mount you can pull just the nuts, but what I like to do is pull the nut and pull the stud as well. It makes it so much easier, especially when it's going back in. Pulling it, you can finagle it out, but going back in, man, if the studs are out as well, it'll save you a few swear words for sure. Now, of course, when you're pulling this mount, have a jack underneath the motor or the trans. So I have that side motor mount off and that little thing holding the motor up. Now all we have is a few bell housing bolts on the backside here, and this transmission will be on the trans jack, and then it'll be on the ground, and we can hopefully dive into it and see what's going on. Okay, trans is off the motor. Do we got a rear main leak, or what's leaking back there? I guess I don't really care, do I? See how easy this is with that subframe removed? So much easier. All right, transmission's out of the car. Let's get her on the table and dive into it. Okay, let's tear this thing down real quick. At minimum, just split the cases. So I know we gotta pull off the shift selector. There's gonna be some little detents we gotta pull, and then there's like probably 15, 14 millimeter bolts holding the cases together. Pull those guys off, and hopefully the transmission comes apart. I guess that's one way to remove it. Quite simple. One thing I'm gonna do is take a few photos. Of course, it's important as far as these sensors go, which one goes where, because it does look like it's the same thread on both sensors. All right, so all that good stuff is off. I believe from here, we just need to pull out the case bolts. There's 2 you got to get from the bell housing side. So all the bolts are out. I believe we just need to pop the case. Yep, there she is. Okay. That's a lot of shavings. Look at that. Nice silver looking gear oil. So we need to pull this out and look at the other side of this. In order to get this out, all those gotta go. Now this is the point where I go through and take unlimited amounts of photos, because if something comes apart, I need to know how it goes back together. All right, here she is. I know I should be wearing gloves, but I'm not. Yep, All pins are coming out, man. All pins, all four. All four pins are out. Sheesh. Look at that. Bam, 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 bam. Those should all be flush with that housing there. And as you can see, when that happens, it wears a whole groove around the whole perimeter. And on one of those areas it wore through, right there. That's where it wore through, right? Yes, it is. Sheesh. I'm surprised I did not hear that as it was happening. But I guess this car, you know, when you're hauling balls, you don't really listen for things like that. It's just loud in general, so that makes sense. Now I need to look over everything else with a clear and fresh mind tomorrow, but it looks like everything else should be fine. Of course, all of our metal shavings was coming from the pins rubbing on the housing or on the case. That's the answer for all of that. Maybe some replacement bearings, but like I said, I'll run through everything tomorrow and see what's going on. I also need to figure out what we need to do to prevent this from happening again. Well, guys, there's the answer. That's what's going on with the Evo 10. This thing should be back up on the road here within the next week, maybe. I need to get a bunch of parts ordered up and get that sorted out and go from there. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have a high horsepower Evo 10, be on the lookout for your diff pins coming through the case. Good night.